Working on the 66 Impala. Here is the front spindle and wheel hub assembly. So what I'm doing right now is I'm replacing the wheel bearings. Just trying to replace everything, get it new for when I start driving it. So if I'm spinning this, I can feel it. It's not the smoothest spinning, and there's just a couple spots there where it catches. So I'm just replacing the wheel bearings, doing it on both sides. Normally this is still on the car, but in my situation I'm doing ball joints, bushings, shocks, springs all at the same time. So it's off the car. I'm doing it now. First step is taking the cap off, and once you get that off, it's still tight for me. Just use a screwdriver and pry it off. But once that's off, then there's a cotter pin and a nut that will come off. Okay, so got my hub off, got my cotter pin. It comes out the hole right there, but anyways, this I can't loosen by hand, which actually means it's too tight. I looked up the specs on this, and the way that this is supposed to be tightened is as you're spinning the wheel hub, you snug down the nut, still spinning the wheel hub, and then once it's snugged up, that'll set the bearing into place, and then you loosen it back up, finger tighten it, and put the cotter pin in. So it's not actually supposed to be finger tight ever. So if it's all the way tightened, you're supposed to loosen it just a little bit to find the next hole for the cotter pin. So this is too tight, which could be why I'm having problems with the bearing going bad on me. Okay, so once you have the nut off, basically this hub, you should just be able to grab it and pull it off by hand. You see how it's loose there. I'm going to use two hands to pull it off just to be safe, but it just pops right off then. Okay, so I got my hub off. You see here, this is the actual shaft where you see where the bearing will sit, and you want to do an investigation on this. Just take a look and make sure that your race wasn't spinning on you, and I don't think that's the case for me, so that should still be good for me. So basically you just take don't lose your washer there, but here's your bearings. Those are getting replaced, so I'm just going to look at them quick for any material or pitting out or anything that shouldn't be there, or heat damage. But basically the race was going to need to come out from the inside. So the way that you go about that is what I like to do. You get a hammer and chisel essentially, and you pound from the opposite way. So just make sure that you're careful not to scratch up the sides of the inside here. And so you have to go pound the bottom one out through the bottom, flip it over, this one gets pounded out from the other side. So you're pounding all the way through the hub here. But basically that's how it comes out. Once you get both of them out, we'll go from there. Okay, so when you look down in here, it makes it a lot easier if you get all the grease out first. But when you're looking down in here, it's actually designed so that they can come back out. So when you take your punch, there's a little insert off on the side here, right here. See, it's not completely round, and it's hollowed out right there, and 180 degrees from there. So it's a spot for you to get your punch into place on that race to pound it out. And that's on both sides. So if you get your grease out of there, you can find that, and then that's where you should actually be pounding. So there's two spots 180 degrees from each other, so that's where you pound on. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Okay, so now that I have both my races out, I've got it kind of cleaned up a little bit just with a paper towel there, but now you can a lot better see what I was talking about with those inserts where you can pound the race out. So this is where the race seats right here, and this is to pound it out. So when you're pounding it out, hit on opposite sides and just one hit at a time, and eventually you'll get it pounded out. So like I said, that's on the top and the bottom there. Okay, so I'm seating the new races here, starting with the big one just because that's the way I had it sitting. Basically, so what I did, here's the old one that I had, and what I did was I took it to the grinder and all the way around just kind of ground the outside of it down to make this smaller. So instead of buying a bearing install kit, basically what I do is I take the old race, take the outside diameter down just with the grinder, clean it up so that you don't get any metal shavings in there. But this way, this race here will slide in and out, into place here. So what I can do is I can take this race and use it to drive this other one in. So the front side is the perfect size and it gets full contact all the way around, and then the outside I can pound on it without an issue. I'll put a socket on top here again and pound on the socket. But then once this race is seated, I can take this one and pound it, or just pull it right up off of there. So I just reach in and pull it out. So make sure that this is really loose, and again, because you're not going to use it again, you don't have to worry about destroying it. But this way you can get your other one seated properly without destroying your new race. Okay, so before I put the bearings in, now that I have the races in, just like how I showed with the old races, just taking those down. But so what I'm gonna do is you gotta pack the bearings with grease. So basically, this here is a bearing packer. I highly recommend it if you don't have one. But basically, once you get the other side of the cap on here, and you want the contour of the cone here to match the contour of your bearing. But basically, once you get the other end of the cap on, you grease it from on the bottom side here. That grease comes up through here, and the cone will have the grease locked into place on the inside of this shaft here. So then the grease has to go through the bottom and then comes out through the bearing right here. So it's just a really fast, efficient way to pack the grease into a bearing. And if you're doing two, like in this case, always do the small bearing first if you're using a bearing packer, because you're going to leave a bunch of grease right around this area right here. Well, then you put your bigger bearing on there, and then it fits right around that grease. Otherwise, if you do the big bearing, then the small bearing, you're putting this bearing in all the grease. So just makes it cleaner that way. But always need to pack your bearing first. And if you don't have a bearing packer, I recommend getting it, but otherwise, go through and push the grease into the bearing all the way around there, and it has to go all the way through so you see it coming out the other side. So it takes time, but it's a lot easier and faster with the bearing packer. Okay, so I got the bearing in the bearing packer. I'll just try to show you what it looks like when you're greasing it. Okay, you saw that grease came out the bottom side of the bearing there. Just make sure that it's all the way around, which you see it is, so that way we know that there's grease in the bearing already before we put it install it, so that it doesn't dry run on it before it gets the grease in. Okay, so I got my first bearing I'm putting in is the bottom one, actually the back side, the bigger one. And then what you do is you put your seal in on top of it, and again, you look at, there's two sides to this. The ring or the lip here, like that, goes to the inside, so the more flat side goes on the outside, and you line that up and pound it into place. It'll get seated all the way down, and then that's in. Flip it over, put your smaller bearing in. Okay, so after I put the hub on, I didn't have my other bearing on yet, and I put grease on the inside between in the hub here and the shaft. So after I put more grease in there, I put the bearing on, and then you see there's a key on there. You put your washer on right, and then your nut. And basically how you do this, like I said before, you tighten it down finger tight. I think I gotta get past that part. Finger tight first, and then you spin your hub as you tighten down the nut, snug down the nut. That's the scientific term there that they use. But as you spin this, you're tightening the nut down, snugging it down. Once you have it snugged down, you loosen it back up, and then tighten it as tight as you can with your fingers, and back it up to the next hole for the cotter pin to go into. And so when it's finger tight and the cotter pin lines up perfectly, loosen it to the next hole, because it should never be that tight. That's just what the spec was. I think it was 65 through maybe 70 or 70 to 72. Anyways, this is 66 for me, so that's what works. You can look it up for yourself and just double check, but that's what I found for it for Chevy A-body front wheel bearings. Okay, so now I had tightened my nut down, loosened it back up, and here's the cotter pin, and this hole was just past it here, so I loosened it back to there, put the cotter pin in. So that's all done. I'm going to get a couple of new caps for both sides, but besides that, I'm basically ready to go here. So yeah, hopefully I get the car back on the road real soon.